real number math today. Today is more of an organizational thing. We're working with congruent triangles. And we are going to be matching the angles that are congruent, the sides that are congruent, and talking about what it means to be congruent. If you have a congruent triangle or a pair of congruent triangles, they are the same shape and the same size. And sometimes it's a little deceiving. It's hard to tell whether or not they're congruent. So we have to look at, remember I said sometimes a 90-degree angle isn't going to look like a 90-degree angle? And so we have to look at the markings. Because angle A is marked with one swish and angle D is marked with another swish, then we would say down here that angle A is congruent to angle D. Agreed? Good with that? What other pairs of angles are congruent? Yes. B and D, or B and E. B and E. So angle B is congruent to angle E. And then we have one more pair of angles that are congruent, right? Marked with the three swishes. Angle C is congruent to angle F. And then let's list the pairs of congruent sides. Same way, read the markings. Give me a pair of sides that are congruent. Go ahead. AB, and it's a segment, is congruent to DE. Beautiful. I need another pair. Go ahead. Yep.
BC and EF.
BC is congruent to EF, and they're segments, so I put the line segment over the top. And then I have one last pair. The only one I didn't say yet is AC and DF. And they're segments, so cover the tops. Now these triangles had everything marked. So I knew exactly what was congruent to each other, and sometimes they'll be listed that way. But because all of the pairs of sides and all of the angles are congruent, or they have corresponding angles that are congruent, we have congruent triangles. But it's important how I write the triangles. So I'm giving myself a little bit of room here to write the order of the triangles. Always list the congruent angles in order. So if I call this triangle ABC, it is congruent to triangle DEF. And notice that A and D were both listed first. A and D are the angles that are congruent. B and E were listed second. B and E are congruent. C and F were listed last. C and F are congruent. I could also write this as, I'm going to go in a different color here. Or I could say triangle BCA is congruent to triangle EFD. Again, do you see what I mean about the importance of lining up the angles that are congruent? Does that make sense? Okay. So let's go through and do our next set. Again, another one that has everything marked. I'm going to let you guys figure that out. I'll give you a few moments to put it all together. I'll answer questions if you have any, and then we'll take a look at the answers shortly. Yes, I can. Once you're done, take a look and see how you did. Now keep in mind that you didn't have to list the angles in order that I listed them, but P has to go with W, and Q has to go with V, and R has to go with U. Same with the sides. You don't have to list it in the order that I list it, but PQ goes with WV, QR goes with VU, and PR goes with WU. On the sides, you can even flip-flop the order as long as it's the same segment. Can somebody name the congruent triangles for me? Go for it. PQR and WVU. Again, please make sure that you line up the congruent angles. That is the important part. All right? So the next two, 3 and 4, are pretty much the same thing, aside from the fact that if you look at the triangle, they're facing different directions. So it's not always going to be facing the same way like our first two, where you could actually physically like pick the second triangle up and put it right on top of the first one and they would match completely, because that's what congruent triangles are. Sometimes your pictures are going to be flipped a little. And so that's what's going on here. But how we work it doesn't change. Just make sure that you match up the symbols appropriately. So in this case, angle J is congruent to angle P, even though that angle J and angle P are not in like corresponding locations. Sometimes they're going to be flipped. So what's more important to look at is not the location, but again, the markings. Good? So angle J goes with angle P. Angle K goes with angle N. And angle L goes with angle M. Again, not about the location, but instead about the markings. And so when we do our sides, we read it the same way. JK goes with NP. And KL goes with NM. They are marked the same. And JL goes with MP. Can somebody give me the pair of congruent triangles in this situation? Triangle what with triangle what? Okay, Jonathan. J, K, L, P, N, M. Good. J, K, L, P, N, M. Okay, again, I'm going to let you guys do number 4. Work through number 4. Look at the markings, not the location. Follow the markings, not the location. And then we're going to step it up a notch. We're going to give pictures of problems that aren't necessarily completed. We're going to have to add some more information to it. But give number 4 a try. Take a look at your answers, compare them to mine when you are finished. Again, keep in mind that I don't have to write E is congruent to R first. In fact, I don't even have to write it in that order. I could put R congruent to E. That part doesn't matter. It's just that E and R at some point have to go together. Segments there's a little more wiggle room with the segments. I could write EG or GE is congruent to RI or IR. I just have to make sure that it represents the segment that are both marked with one tick mark. And then also remember, as far as your congruent triangles go, it doesn't matter the order that you write the letters, just make sure in both of your triangles that the letters match. That's what's important. Like I said, there's going to be an instance where you're not given everything marked. It's really nice when these are. How bad was this to work with? Not too bad, right? You could just match things up. What if it's not all marked up? What if the picture gives you some information, but it doesn't give all of the information? Then we are free to put in the problem what we know. And so they're going to sometimes give us some statements, and on other occasions, they're going to just leave the rules up to us to know. Like, for example, what is one thing I know in this picture that isn't necessarily marked, but is true about the third set of angles? Did you have your hand up or just no? Okay. Yeah.
The C is like vertical angles.
Right here is vertical, so these are congruent. So you can always mark congruent angles. I could actually mark the angles up here, right? The upper and the lower, but are those going to help me with my triangle? No. So I don't bother doing that. They are, yes, congruent, but it's not going to set up the triangle for me. And then after I fill in the picture with all the knowledge that I have, that's just the assumed to be known, then I can go back to this information. What does it mean if C is the midpoint of AE? So if C is the midpoint of AE, what statement can I make? Midpoint is C, and what does that mean? These two chunks are congruent, right. So I can go ahead and mark that. Do I want to mark them with one tick mark? No, why not? That's already used. So I'll do with 2 tick marks. So the midpoint C, midpoint of BD, what does that mean? That these guys are congruent as well. So I just put in my little tick marks. Again, I'll do a different size. Even if these two sides might look the same, or BC and AB might look like they're the same measure, we don't know that they are the same measure. The only thing I know is that C is the midpoint of BD, so BC and CD must be the same length. And then I can fill in the rest of the stuff. So angle A is congruent to angle E because they both have 2 tick marks. And angle B is congruent to angle D because they both have 1 mark. Can I just say angle C is congruent to angle C? No, because I need to be more clear. C is the vertex of 4 different angles. So what would I write here? I have to write mine above because I write too big. Angle ACB, remember C has to be the vertex, so ACB is congruent to angle ECD. C being the vertex, so C will have to line up with C when I write my congruent triangles. Let's go with the pairs of sides. AB is congruent to AED, they both have 1 tick mark. AC is congruent to EC, they both have 2 tick marks. And BC is congruent to CD, they both have 3 tick marks. Let's name our congruent triangles. Triangle what to triangle what? Notice I'm using the congruent symbol. I've used it a lot. I haven't even talked about it too much, but the congruent symbol, what triangles are congruent? Give me any set of triangles you want that are congruent. Somebody have something for me? Okay, go ahead.
Triangle ABC is congruent to
EDC, beautiful. Does it have to be in that order? No. But A has to be in the same slot as E, B has to be in the same slot as D, and the C's have to match up because those are the congruent angles. We're going to do one more today, and then we're going to save the last one to do as a refresher before we start tomorrow's stuff. But so we're just going to do number 6 as the last one, and then I'm going to hand out your homework to work on. So I've got a whole bunch of different information up here, and I've also got the picture down here. Do I have anything that I can mark automatically? Yeah. 3 and 4 are right angles, and we know that because they gave us it's perpendicular, right? They say BM is a perpendicular bisector, so if BM is a perpendicular bisector, angle 3 and angle 4 are both right angles. That's what perpendicular means, okay? What does the bisector part on that mean? Yep. So that makes M the midpoint. Yep. And so I know AM and MC are congruent to each other as well. Okay, anything else I can mark? So we use this top one. Jonathan, what do you see?
BM bisects ABC, so 1 and 2 are congruent.
So angle 1 and angle 2 are congruent. Great. All right. So those are our given things. We checked all those off. What else can I fill in? I don't have everything marked. Angle A and angle C are also congruent. How do you know that? I know exactly what you mean. We have an isosceles triangle. These two sides are congruent, right? So we learned this the other day. So the opposite angles are congruent. If the two sides are congruent, the opposite angles are congruent. All right? It looks like I've got most things marked. The only other thing is that third side. I've got the 1 tick mark for those far outsides. I've got the 2 tick marks for the bottoms where the midpoint was. What about this third side? Is BM congruent to BM? Yeah, it has to be, right? Just commonsensically, it's the same thing. So if it's itself, we can mark that as its congruent side. So they both share that side BM. So I can write on this bottom one here that BM is congruent to BM. That's one of those things, kind of like vertical angles. I can mark that automatically. All right, so let's get our angles going. We'll say angle 1 is congruent to angle 2. Angle 3 is congruent to angle 4. Angle A is congruent to angle C. I have a little bit of a problem. It was really easy to label angle 1 and angle 2, and angle 3 and angle 4. But on all the previous ones, we were able to kind of line up our angles to help us name the congruent triangles. So I'm going to have to do a little more thinking when I write out my triangles, my actual congruent triangles. So let's get the sides. So BM to itself, and then AM congruent to CM, and AB congruent to BC. We had to fill in our information there. Can somebody name the congruent triangles? What is congruent to what? And be careful, take your time, think about the positions of everything. Does somebody think? Go ahead.
BMC is congruent to BMA.
BMC is congruent to BMA. Does that work? Angle B up at the top gives me angle 1 and angle 2. M gives me angle 3 and angle 4. And then A and C are congruent. So BMC is congruent to BMA. Perfect. The congruent angles match. All right. So your job is going to be to work on your homework, dealing with this stuff. And again, we'll refresh our brains tomorrow on the last one, on problem number 7. And then we'll carry on to more on congruent triangles.